Some people run to the mountains to escape their past. Others stay there because the past won't let them go. 62-year-old Theona Riggs has lived alone in the Bitterroot Mountains for 30 years, keeping to herself and the quiet rhythms of winter. After a brutal storm, she walks out to check the trail and sees something that makes her heart stop. Down on the frozen lake, someone has spelled out S.O.S. in stones. No tracks lead to it. No smoke rises anywhere. No one has been reported missing. Just 3 letters on the ice, calling for help. Theona follows the clues into the snow and finds more than a stranger in trouble. She finds a mystery tied to her own past, one she thought was buried for good. What happened on that frozen lake, and why does it feel like it was meant for her to find? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at 7,800 feet, tucked into a fold of granite and Douglas fir, where the wind couldn't reach it but the sun could. Theona Riggs had built most of it herself over the course of 2 summers, back when her hands were steadier and her back didn't complain about every load of firewood. That was 28 years ago. The logs had weathered to a silvery grey that blended into the mountainside, and the stone chimney she'd mortared stood straight and true, sending up thin ribbons of smoke on cold mornings like this one. She woke before dawn, the way she always did. The darkness inside the cabin was complete, the kind of darkness you only found miles from any electric light. She lay still for a moment, listening. The wind had died sometime in the night. The storm that had battered the Bitterroots for 3 days had finally moved on, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a presence in the room. Theona pushed back the quilts and swung her legs out of bed, her feet finding the rag rug she'd made from old wool shirts. The cabin was cold. She'd let the fire die down overnight to conserve wood, and now the thermometer on the wall read 32 degrees. She pulled on her thermal layers, thick wool socks, and the flannel shirt she'd worn for the better part of a decade. Every movement was practiced, efficient. 30 years in these mountains had taught her not to waste motion or heat. She stirred the coals in the wood stove, added kindling, and watched the flames catch. While the cabin warmed, she filled the kettle from the 5-gallon jug she kept by the sink and set it on the stove. The water would take 10 minutes to boil. She used the time to pull on her boots and step outside. The cold hit her like a wall. 20 below, maybe colder with the wind chill, though there was no wind now. Just crystalline air and a sky beginning to pale in the east. The snow lay 3 feet deep across the clearing, deeper where it had drifted against the woodshed and the propane tank. The storm had been a monster, one of those late-season blizzards that could kill a person if they weren't careful. Theona walked to the woodshed, her breath making clouds in the air. She loaded her arms with split pine and carried it back to the cabin, made 2 more trips, stacking the wood by the stove where it would dry. This was her morning routine, unchanged for 3 decades. Haul wood, make coffee, check the weather instruments, try the radio. The coffee was instant, strong, and black. She stood by the window with the mug warming her hands, watching the light grow. The view from her cabin stretched across a narrow valley to the ridge beyond, all of it covered in snow that caught the first rays of sun and turned pink, then gold, then white. It was the kind of beauty that could break your heart if you let it. She didn't let it, not anymore. At full light, she checked her instruments. The barometer was rising good, the weather would hold. The thermometer read 19 below. The anemometer she'd mounted on the roof showed the wind at 0. She wrote the numbers in her log, a weathered leather journal she'd kept since her first winter here. Page after page of temperatures, wind speeds, snow depths, and brief notes. Saw elk herd on North Ridge. Radio contact with coal, all clear. Roof leak, fixed. Her life reduced to data points and short sentences. The radio sat on a shelf above the table, a sturdy 2-way unit connected to a solar-charged battery and an antenna she'd strung between 2 tall pines. She turned it on, adjusted the frequency, and pressed the transmit button. "This is Riggs Station, calling Bitterroot Ranger Station. Cole, you there?" Static. She waited 30 seconds and tried again. "Riggs Station to Bitterroot Ranger. Checking in after the storm. Over." More static. She frowned. The radio had been cutting in and out since the storm began, probably ice on the antenna or damage to the relay tower and down in the valley. It happened sometimes. She'd been out of contact for 3 days, but that wasn't unusual. Cole Brennan, the ranger who usually answered, knew she could take care of herself. He wouldn't worry unless she went silent for more than a week. Still, it bothered her. The radio was her only link to the world beyond the mountains, and she liked to know it worked. She ate breakfast standing up, oatmeal with dried berries and a spoonful of honey she'd traded for last summer when a beekeeper passed through. She ate quickly, efficiently, her mind already moving to the day's tasks. The storm would have brought down trees, blocked trails, maybe damaged the weather station she maintained on the North Ridge. She needed to check the main trail, the one that ran from her cabin to the fire road 5 miles east. It was part of her agreement with the Forest Service. She lived here year-round, rent-free, in exchange for maintaining the trails and reporting conditions. It was a good arrangement. It kept her busy and gave her a reason to stay. Not that she needed a reason anymore. This was home, the only home that had ever felt right. She packed her day bag with care. Extra layers, fire kit, first aid supplies, emergency bivvy, water, energy bars, headlamp, knife, compass, map, whistle, and her satellite phone, which she kept for true emergencies. The pack weighed 20 pounds. She could carry it all day without strain. 62 years old, and she could still hike most people half her age into the ground. Before she left, she stood in the center of the cabin and looked around. The space was small but sufficient. One room with the bed in the corner, the table and 2 chairs, the wood stove, a counter with a basin and a hand pump connected to a spring-fed cistern outside, shelves lined with books and supplies. The walls were hung with tools, snowshoes, a recurve bow she used for hunting, and a few photographs in frames. She didn't look at the photographs often. One showed a younger version of herself standing beside a man, both of them squinting in bright sunlight. Another showed a little girl with dark braids, maybe 7 years old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. The frames were dusty. She should take them down, put them away. But she never did. Theona locked the cabin door more out of habit than necessity, since no one came up here and strapped on her snowshoes. The day was clear and cold, the sun brilliant on the snow. She set out toward the North Ridge, following a route she'd walked 1,000 times. The forest was silent except for the creak of her snowshoes and the occasional crack of a tree adjusting to the cold. The storm had bent the pines under the weight of snow, and several had snapped, their trunks shattered like matchsticks. She made mental notes of where she'd need to bring the chainsaw to clear the trail. After an hour, she reached the switchback that climbed to the ridge. Her legs burned with the effort, and her breath came hard in the thin air. But it was a good burn, a good hardness. It meant she was alive and strong and doing what she was meant to do. The ridgetop was exposed, swept nearly clean of snow by the wind. She could see for miles in every direction, the sawtooth peaks to the west, the valley dropping away to the east, and to the north, the terrain growing wilder and more remote, a landscape few people ever saw. And there, far below, was the frozen lake. She'd known it was there, of course. It sat in a basin 2 miles away, fed by snowmelt in spring and frozen solid from November to May. She'd been to it a handful of times over the years, mostly in summer when the hiking was easier. It wasn't on any trail. Most people didn't know it existed. But something made her look at it now, really look. Maybe it was the angle of the sun, or the clarity of the air after the storm, or just instinct. She pulled the binoculars from her pack and raised them to her eyes. The lake was a white, oval, smooth and unbroken, surrounded by dark pines. She scanned across it slowly, adjusting the focus. And then she saw it. 3 letters, spelled out in stones across the ice. Each letter 10 feet tall, maybe more. Dark against white, unmistakable. S.O.S. Theona lowered the binoculars. Her heart was pounding, and not from the climb. She raised them again, studied the scene more carefully. The stones were evenly spaced, deliberately placed. They weren't natural, not part of the landscape. Someone had put them there. Recently, too, the storm would have buried anything older under drifts of snow. She scanned the area around the lake, looking for other signs. No smoke from a fire, no tent or shelter visible. No tracks in the snow leading to or from the letters, though the wind might have erased them. Who would be out here, and why would they signal for help on a frozen lake miles from any road or trail? The radio on her belt crackled with static, then fell silent. No help there. Theona stood on the ridge for a long moment, thinking. She could go back to the cabin, wait for the radio to work, report it to Cole. That would be the sensible thing. Let the professionals handle it. But the professionals were at least a day away, maybe more with the snow, and whoever had made that signal might not have a day. She looked at the lake again through the binoculars. The letters stared back at her, stark and desperate. S.O.S. She made her decision. The trail check could wait. Someone needed help, and she was the only one who could give it. She adjusted her pack, checked her compass bearing, and started down the slope toward the frozen lake. The terrain was steep, and the snow was deep, but she'd traveled worse. She moved carefully, testing each step, using her poles for balance. It took her 40 minutes to reach the tree line above the lake, and another 10 to work her way down to the shore. Up close, the lake looked even more desolate. The ice was thick, probably 2 feet or more, and the surface was scoured smooth by the wind. The stones of the S.O.S. were clearly visible now, each one the size of a fist, dark river rock that didn't belong here on the ice. Theona approached cautiously, studying the scene. Still no tracks, no sign of anyone nearby. But the stones were real, and they'd been placed here for a reason. She knelt beside the first letter, the S, and touched one of the stones. It was cold, obviously, but underneath, where it met the ice, there was a faint warmth. Not much, just enough to tell her these stones had been placed within the last day, maybe the last few hours. Someone had been here. Recently. She stood and turned in a slow circle, scanning the forest around the lake. Nothing moved. The silence pressed in on her, heavy and waiting. "Hello?" she called. Her voice echoed off the rocks and died. "Is anyone there? I saw your signal. I'm here to help." No answer, just the wind beginning to pick up, whispering through the pines. Theona's instincts prickled. Something was wrong here. The S.O.S. was too perfect, too deliberate, and the lack of tracks, the absence of any other sign, it felt staged, like a setup. But for what? And for whom? She pulled out her satellite phone and checked the signal. 1 bar. Enough. She considered calling for help, but what would she say? "I found some rocks on a lake. No one's in immediate danger that I can see." No. She needed more information first. She needed to understand what was happening here. Theona began a systematic search of the lakeshore, moving in a widening spiral from the S.O.S., looking for any clue that might explain this mystery. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose above zero, and somewhere in the vast silence of the Bitterroot Mountains, someone was waiting to see what she would do next. Theona worked the perimeter of the frozen lake with the methodical patience of someone who'd spent 3 decades reading sign in the wilderness. Every broken branch, every disturbed patch of snow, every shadow that didn't quite fit, she catalogued it all, building a picture in her mind of what had happened here. The S.O.S. sat in the center of the ice, perfectly positioned to be visible from the air or from the ridge where she'd been standing. That was the first thing that struck her as odd. Whoever placed those stones knew about sightlines and aerial visibility. This wasn't the panicked work of someone lost and desperate. This was calculated. She tested the ice near the shore, tapping it with her walking stick. Solid. 2 feet thick at least, probably more after the long, cold snap. Safe enough to walk on, though she moved carefully anyway, distributing her weight, listening for any crack or groan that might signal weakness. The stones themselves were river rock, smooth and dark, the kind you'd find in a stream bed after spring runoff. But the nearest creek was half a mile away, and these stones were uniform in size, deliberately selected. Someone had carried them here, probably in a pack. That meant planning, preparation. Theona photographed the S.O.S. from multiple angles, using the small camera she kept in her emergency kit. The light was good now, the sun at the right angle, to show every detail. She documented the spacing, the arrangement, the way the stones sat on the ice. Then she moved to the shoreline and began her search in earnest. It took her 20 minutes to find the first real clue, a scrap of fabric, bright orange, snagged on a low pine branch about 30 feet back from the water's edge. She pulled it free carefully, examined it in the light. Technical fabric, the kind used in expensive outdoor gear, torn, not cut. Recent, the fabric still had some flexibility, hadn't been exposed to the weather long enough to get stiff and brittle. She bagged it in a Ziploc from her first aid kit and continued her search. The boot print came next, preserved under the overhang of a fallen log, where the wind hadn't been able to reach it. A single clear impression in a patch of sheltered snow. Women's size 7 or 8, she estimated, with a tread pattern she almost recognized. Modern hiking boot, good quality. The print showed a normal gait, no sign of injury or distress, just someone walking, deliberately, carefully. Theona knelt beside the print and studied it. The depth was consistent. The person who made it wasn't carrying a heavy load. The edges were clean, which meant it was recent, probably made in the last 24 hours before the wind died, and new snow could fill it in. She photographed it, measured it with a small tape measure from her pack, and noted the location on her map. The shelter was the third piece of the puzzle. She found it tucked beneath a granite overhang about 100 yards from the lake, invisible unless you knew where to look. Someone had scraped out the snow to create a small hollow, just big enough for one person to sit or lie down. The rock overhang above would have protected them from the worst of the storm. Inside the hollow, she found evidence of recent occupation. Compressed snow where someone had sat or lain, a few granola bar wrappers shoved into a crack in the rock, and a broken compass, the kind you could buy at any sporting goods store. The glass face was cracked, the needle stuck, pointing northwest. No blood, no signs of injury or struggle, just evidence that someone had stopped here, sheltered here, and then moved on. Theona sat back on her heels, thinking, none of this added up to a typical lost hiker scenario. The S.O.S. was too deliberate. The trail of clues, the fabric, the boot print, the shelter felt almost like breadcrumbs, left intentionally for someone to follow. But who? And why? She pulled out her water bottle and took a long drink, her mind working through the possibilities. Someone staging a rescue scenario for attention? Possible, but unlikely. This was too remote, too cold, too dangerous. Someone playing an elaborate prank? Even less likely. Someone leaving a trail for a specific person to follow. That last thought made something cold settle in her chest. She took out the orange fabric again and looked at it more carefully. The color was distinctive, not the kind of thing most people would choose for wilderness travel, where blending in was safer. This was meant to be seen, meant to be found, by her. The thought should have seemed paranoid, but Theona had survived 3 decades in these mountains by trusting her instincts, and her instincts were screaming at her now. This wasn't random. This was personal. She returned to the shelter and searched more carefully, running her hands along the rock face, checking every crack and crevice. That's when she found it, wedged deep in a gap between 2 stones where it wouldn't be blown away by wind or covered by snow. A silver locket on a delicate chain. Theona's hands shook as she pulled it free. The locket was tarnished with age and exposure, but she recognized it immediately. She'd seen one exactly like it, 30 years ago, on the day she'd given it to her 7-year-old daughter as a birthday present. No, not exactly like it. This was that locket. She fumbled with the catch, her fingers clumsy in the cold. The locket opened, and inside was a photograph, protected from the elements by the metal case, but still water-damaged around the edges. 2 figures, a young woman, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s, and a child, perhaps 10 or 11. The woman's face was turned slightly away from the camera, features blurred, but something about her, the way she stood, the tilt of her head, sent recognition flooding through Theona. Kayla, her daughter, the little girl with dark braids who'd left home at 18 after a fight that had torn their family apart, the child she hadn't seen or spoken to in 30 years, and the girl in the photo. Theona studied her face more closely. Could that be Kayla's daughter, Theona's granddaughter, a child she'd never known existed? She sat down hard on a nearby boulder, the locket clutched in her hand. The world seemed to tilt and settle into a new configuration. The S.O.S. wasn't a random distress call. It was a message from Kayla to her. But why? And where was she now? Theona forced herself to breathe, to think clearly. If Kayla had left this trail, she'd done it for a reason. She was trying to communicate something, lead Theona somewhere, but she couldn't or wouldn't make contact directly. That meant she was either in trouble or trying to protect Theona from something, or both. The sun had moved across the sky. It was past noon now, and the temperature had risen to maybe 10 degrees. She didn't have much daylight left. If she was going to follow this trail, she needed to move. Theona stood, tucked the locket carefully into her inside pocket where it would be safe, and began searching the area around the shelter more systematically. If Kayla had left the locket as a sign, there would be more. Another clue, another piece of the puzzle. She found it 10 minutes later, a small pile of stones arranged in an arrow shape, pointing northeast, away from the lake and deeper into the wilderness. The stones were placed on a flat rock, where they'd be visible but not obvious, where someone searching carefully would find them, but the wind wouldn't disturb them. Northeast, toward Copper Ridge and the old mining camp. Theona knew that area. She'd avoided it for years, ever since she'd first come to these mountains. The mine had been abandoned in the 70s, and the structures were dangerous rotting timbers, open shafts, unstable ground. It was no place to be in winter. But that's where Kayla was leading her. She checked her watch. 2 in the afternoon. She could make it to Copper Ridge before dark if she pushed hard, but she wouldn't have time to search the area and get back to her cabin before nightfall. That meant she'd need to prepare for a night out, in sub-zero temperatures, with limited supplies. Or she could go back to the cabin, resupply, and return tomorrow with proper gear. The safe choice was obvious. The smart choice was to retreat and regroup. But Kayla, if it was really Kayla, had left this trail, had made that S.O.S. And somewhere out there, maybe hurt, maybe in danger, was a woman who'd once been her daughter. A woman who, for some reason, needed her help but couldn't ask for it directly. Theona adjusted her pack and started walking northeast, following the arrow of stones toward Copper Ridge. Behind her, the S.O.S. on the frozen lake glinted in the afternoon sun, a message sent and received, a desperate call across 30 years of silence. She moved as quickly as the snow and terrain allowed, her mind churning through everything she knew and everything she didn't. The locket weighed heavy in her pocket, and with every step she felt the past, reaching up to claim her, pulling her back into a life she'd thought she'd left behind forever. The terrain grew rougher as Theona pushed northeast toward Copper Ridge. The forest thickened, the pines giving way to dense stands of fir and spruce that blocked the sun and kept the snow deep and soft. She was breaking trail now, post-holing through drifts that came up to her knees, sometimes her thighs. Hard work, exhausting work, and she could feel her age in every step, but she didn't slow down. The arrow of stones had been clear, and once she knew what to look for, she found other signs. A branch broken at shoulder height, the break fresh and deliberate. Another scrap of orange fabric tied to a tree at eye level. Small cairns of stones placed at intervals, marking the route like a trail of breadcrumbs through the forest. Someone wanted her to follow. Someone was making sure she could. The afternoon light took on the golden quality that preceded dusk, and Theona knew she was running out of time. She should stop, make camp, wait for morning. But the thought of Kayla out here somewhere, possibly hurt, possibly in danger, kept her moving forward. She tried not to think too much about the last time she'd seen her daughter. The argument had been fierce and final, the kind of fight that breaks families. Kayla had been 18, fresh out of high school, full of anger at the choices Theona had made, leaving her father, moving to the mountains, choosing solitude over family. "You're running away," Kayla had shouted. "You're just running away from everything, from everyone who needs you." And Theona, exhausted from years of trying to explain something she didn't fully understand herself, had said the words she'd regretted ever since. "Maybe I am. Maybe that's what I need to do." Kayla had left that night. Theona heard she'd moved in with her father, Marcus, for a while, then struck out on her own. After that, nothing. No calls, no letters, no contact. Theona had told herself it was for the best, that Kayla was better off without a mother who couldn't figure out how to live in the world. But she'd thought about her daughter every day, wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she was happy. The photographs in the cabin were dusty, but Theona knew every detail of them by heart. And now, somehow, after 3 decades, Kayla was here, in these mountains, leaving trails for Theona to follow. The forest opened up ahead, and Theona found herself standing at the edge of a narrow ravine. On the other side, maybe 50 yards away, was the first structure of the Copper Ridge mining camp. A collapsed building, mostly just a frame now, with a few weathered boards still clinging to the skeleton of what had once been a bunkhouse. She studied the terrain. The ravine wasn't deep, maybe 15 feet, but the sides were steep and icy. She could see a way down, a game trail or old access route that zigzagged down the near side. Getting across would mean descending, crossing the frozen creek at the bottom, and climbing up the other side. In good conditions, maybe 15 minutes. In this snow and ice, closer to half an hour. The light was fading fast now. She had maybe an hour before full dark. Theona started down the trail, moving carefully, testing each foothold. The ravine walls were a mix of rock and frozen earth, treacherous in the low light. Halfway down, her foot slipped on a patch of ice, and she caught herself hard on her walking stick, wrenching her shoulder. She paused, breathing hard, waiting for the pain to subside. Not a bad injury, just a strain, but it reminded her how alone she was out here. One serious fall, one broken bone, and she'd be the one needing rescue. And there was no one coming for her. The thought made her laugh, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the ravine. She'd spent 30 years making sure no one needed to come for her. Independence had been her refuge, her strength, shield, and now it might be her downfall. She continued down more carefully, reached the bottom, and crossed the narrow creek. The ice was thick here too, but she could hear water running underneath, a sound that made her uneasy. Ice over running water was always dangerous, unpredictable. The climb up the other side was harder. Her shoulder throbbed, and her legs were heavy with fatigue. But she made it, pulling herself up the last few feet by grabbing onto exposed roots and rocks, and emerged at the top, breathing hard and sweating despite the cold. The mining camp spread out before her in the twilight. 5 or 6 structures, in various states of collapse, scattered across maybe 2 acres of cleared ground. The largest building, probably the old processing facility, stood at the far end, its roof sagging but still mostly intact. Rusted equipment lay half buried in the snow. a broken cart on rails, a winch, piles of rotting timbers, and from the processing facility, a thin ribbon of smoke rose into the darkening sky. Theona's pulse quickened. Someone was there, someone with a fire. She approached cautiously, circling wide to get a better view. The building had 3 walls still standing, and most of its roof. Through gaps in the boards, she could see the flicker of firelight inside. "Hello?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I saw your signal. I'm here to help." No response. The fire continued to burn, but no one appeared. Theona moved closer, every sense alert. Something felt wrong. The whole setup, the S.O.S. The trail of clues, the fire felt like a stage set, everything arranged for her arrival. She reached the building and peered through a gap in the boards. Inside, she could see a small fire burning in what had once been a metal stove. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. There was a sleeping bag laid out, a pack propped against the wall, supplies arranged on a makeshift table. But no person. "Kayla?" She called. "It's me. It's your mother. If you're here, please, let's talk." Still nothing. Theona found the door, or what remained of it, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. She pushed it open and stepped inside, her hand on the knife at her belt. The interior was warmer than outside, the fire providing real heat in the enclosed space. She could see everything clearly now in the firelight. The sleeping bag was empty but recently used. The pack held food, water, basic supplies. On the makeshift table, a sheet of plywood balanced on 2 sawhorses lay a bundle wrapped in cloth. Theona approached the table slowly. The bundle was tied with twine, and underneath it, someone had left a note written on a torn piece of paper in handwriting she recognized instantly, even after 3 decades. "Mom, I'm sorry. I had to leave. He's coming. Please find Sienna. She needs you. The old fire tower 3 miles east. She's waiting. Be careful. He's dangerous. I love you. I always have. Kay." Theona's hands shook as she untied the bundle. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied together with more twine, yellowed with age. The top envelope was addressed to her in Kayla's handwriting, and the postmark, faded but readable, was from 32 years ago. She opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Mum, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you think you're better off alone. But I need you to know I'm okay. I'm staying with Dad for now, but it's not great. He drinks too much, and he's angry all the time. I wish you would call. I wish you would write. I miss you. Love, Kayla." Theona sank down onto the floor, her legs no longer able to hold her. She flipped through the letters, reading dates. They spanned decades. Letter after letter, year after year, all addressed to her, none ever sent. Or rather, all written but never mailed, kept by Kayla like a journal of a one-sided conversation. She read another, from 15 years ago. "Mom, I had a baby, a girl. I named her Sienna. She's beautiful. She has your eyes, or what I remember of them. I wish you could meet her. I wish I could tell her about you. But I don't know where you are, and I'm not sure you'd want to know about us anyway. Marcus, Dad, he's getting worse. I had to leave him. I'm on my own now with Sienna, and I'm scared, but we're managing. I wish you were here. I wish I could hear your voice telling me it's going to be okay." Theona's vision blurred with tears. She wiped them away impatiently and kept reading, letter after letter, watching her daughter's life unfold in words she'd never received. Kayla's struggles to make ends meet, her pride in Sienna's accomplishments, her fears, her hopes, her loneliness. And then, the most recent letter, dated 1 week ago. "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you're still alive. But I'm out of options. Marcus found us. I don't know how, but he did. He's threatening me, saying I owe him, demanding I sign over rights to Grandpa's land. I didn't even know Grandpa died, didn't know he left me anything. But Marcus says there's property and money, and he wants it. He says he'll hurt Sienna if I don't cooperate. I need to disappear for a while. I need to keep her safe. If anything happens to me, please, if you're out there somewhere, please find her. She's all I have. She's all that matters. I'm taking her to the mountains, your mountains. I remember you telling me once, when I was little, about a place you loved more than anywhere else in the world. I'm hoping I can find it. I'm hoping I can find you. Please, Mom. Please help us. Theona clutched the letters to her chest, feeling the weight of 30 years of missed chances and unspoken words. Kayla had needed her, had been reaching out across the silence, hoping for an answer that never came. And now Kayla was in danger, and there was a granddaughter Sienna waiting somewhere, alone and frightened. The fire crackled in the stove, and outside, full darkness had fallen. Theona stood up, her decision made. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't undo the years of silence and separation. But she could do this. She could find Sienna. She could protect her. She could finally, after 3 decades, be the mother and grandmother she should have been all along. She checked her pack, rationed her supplies, and studied the note again. 3 miles east, the old fire tower. She knew the place. It had been abandoned for years, but the structure was sound, defensible, a good place to hide a child. But first, she needed to understand who he was, who was coming. Marcus, Kayla's father, Theona's ex-husband, a man she hadn't seen in 3 decades, a man she'd left for good reasons. He was out here, in her mountains, hunting her daughter, and she needed to be prepared for what that might mean. Theona made a decision she'd sworn she'd never make again. She went to the back corner of the processing building where she'd stashed her emergency pack, the one with extra supplies she'd brought from the cabin. From the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and secured in a lockbox, she retrieved her old service revolver, a Smith & Wesson .38 special she'd carried during her years as a wilderness EMT, back before she'd moved to the mountains permanently. She'd kept it all these years, telling herself it was just a tool, just insurance, but she'd never needed it, never wanted to need it. She checked the cylinder, still loaded. 6 rounds, kept clean and dry. The weight of it in her hand felt wrong and right at the same time, a tool she'd hoped never to use again, but one she knew how to use well if she had to. This wasn't about the mountains anymore. This was about family, about protecting the people she loved. Theona's jaw tightened. She secured the revolver in her coat pocket, fed more wood to the fire, laid out her sleeping bag, and prepared for a few hours of rest. She couldn't travel safely in full darkness, not in this terrain. But at first light, she would move. She would find Sienna. And if Marcus got in her way, he would discover that the woman he'd once controlled was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd survived 3 decades in the wilderness, someone who would protect her family, no matter what it cost. She lay down in the sleeping bag, the letters tucked safely in her inside pocket along with the locket, and closed her eyes. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by memories of a life she'd tried to leave behind, and the sound of wind howling through the abandoned buildings of Copper Ridge like the ghosts of choices past. Theona woke to absolute cold and perfect darkness. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and then it all came flooding back: the S.O.S, the trail, the letters, Sienna waiting at the old fire tower. She checked her watch, 4:30 in the morning. The fire had died down to coals, and the temperature inside the building had dropped below freezing. She got up stiffly, her muscles protesting after yesterday's hard trek. Her shoulder still ached from the slip in the ravine, but it was functional. She stirred the coals, added kindling and small pieces of wood from the pile someone Kayla had stacked nearby. The flames caught, and she held her hands over them, waiting for feeling to return to her fingers. While the building warmed slightly, she ate a cold breakfast of energy bars and melted snow for water. Not ideal, but sufficient. She repacked her gear, made sure everything was secure. 3 miles to the fire tower, in good conditions, maybe an hour and a half. in deep snow and rough terrain, more like 3 hours. She wanted to be there by full light. Before she left, she did something that felt strange after 30 years of solitude. She wrote a note. "Kayla, I found your letters. I'm going to Sienna now. I will keep her safe. When you can, come to my cabin. You know where it is, I'm sure you've been watching. We need to talk. About Marcus. About everything. Be careful. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm here now. Mom." She left the note weighted down with a stone on the makeshift table where Kayla would find it if she returned. Then she shouldered her pack and stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The cold was shocking, even after all these years. 25, maybe 30 below zero. Cold enough to kill in minutes if you weren't prepared. Theona adjusted her face mask, pulled up her hood, and started east. She navigated by compass and headlamp, moving carefully through the forest. The snow was crusty on top from the daytime melt and refreeze, and it held her weight for 2 or 3 steps before breaking through. Exhausting work, but she maintained a steady pace, 1 foot in front of the other, her breath forming clouds of ice crystals in the light of her headlamp. As she walked, she thought about Marcus. They'd met when she was 23, young and uncertain and looking for someone to tell her who she should be. He'd been older, confident, controlling in ways she hadn't recognized as dangerous until it was too late. The marriage had lasted 7 years, and by the end, she'd felt like she was drowning, smothered by his need to control every aspect of her life. Leaving him had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. Taking Kayla and running in the middle of the night, finding a women's shelter, starting over with nothing. For a few years she'd tried to make it work in town, tried to give Kayla a normal life, but Marcus had found them, again and again. Restraining orders didn't stop him, moving to different towns didn't stop him. So finally, when Kayla was 12, Theona had made a different choice. She'd moved to the mountains, to a place so remote that Marcus couldn't follow. She'd thought distance would keep them safe. But Kayla, angry and confused and too young to understand the full story, had seen it as abandonment, had chosen to go live with her father when she turned 18, despite Theona's warnings. And now, 30 years later, he'd found Kayla again, was threatening her, threatening a granddaughter Theona had never known existed. Some men, she thought grimly, never changed. Some men never stopped trying to control, to possess, to hurt. The sky began to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue to grey. Theona switched off her headlamp and kept moving. The fire tower should be close now, maybe another mile. That's when she saw the tracks. Fresh tracks, maybe 3 or 4 hours old, crossing her path at an angle. Large boot prints, men's size 11 or 12, heading northeast, the same direction she was going. Theona's pulse kicked up. She knelt and examined the tracks more closely. Heavy gait, probably someone carrying a significant load. The stride length suggested someone tall, moving with purpose. And the tracks were following the same general route she was taking. Toward the fire tower, toward Sienna. She stood up and broke into as much of a run as the snow allowed. Exhaustion forgotten, pain forgotten, everything forgotten except the need to get to the tower, to reach Sienna before whoever made these tracks did. The forest opened up ahead, and she saw it. The old fire lookout tower, a wooden structure on stilts, rising 50 feet above the surrounding trees. The tower had been built in the 1950 seconds and abandoned in the 1980 seconds when aerial surveillance replaced manned lookouts. The structure was weathered but still standing, the stairs zigzagging up the outside to the enclosed cabin at the top. Theona approached cautiously, scanning the area. The large boot prints led straight to the base of the tower and up the stairs. At the top, she could see the lookout cabin, its windows dark. "Sienna?" she called softly. "Are you up there? It's your grandmother. Your mother sent me." No response. She started up the stairs, moving as quietly as she could, despite her heavy breathing. and tired legs. The stairs creaked under her weight, the wood old and weathered. Halfway up, she paused and called again. "Sienna? I'm coming up. I'm here to help." This time, she heard something. A faint sound, like movement inside the cabin. Then a voice, young and frightened. "Who are you?" Relief flooded through Theona. She was alive, safe, at least for the moment. "I'm your grandmother," Theona said. "Your mother, Kayla, she sent me to find you. I have something of hers, a locket. She left it for me at the lake. I have her letters." Silence. Then, "Prove it. What's my name?" "Sienna," Theona said. "Your mother wrote about you in her letters. She said you're 14. She said you have my eyes, or what she remembers of them. She said you're everything to her." More silence. Then the sound of movement, and the door to the cabin opened a crack. A face appeared, pale and thin, framed by dark hair pulled back in a braid. Eyes that were indeed like Theona's own. Eyes grey-green, sharp, taking in everything. "Show me the locket," the girl said. Theona climbed the rest of the stairs and held out the silver locket. Sienna opened the door wider and took it, opened it, looked at the photograph inside. Her face crumpled. "That's us," she whispered. "That's me and Mom, from 4 years ago." "I know," Theona said gently. "Can I come in? It's very cold, and we need to talk." Sienna hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Theona entered the cabin, noting the sleeping bag in the corner, the small pile of supplies, the way the girl had barricaded the door with a chair. "Where's Mom?" Sienna asked. "Why didn't she come?" "She had to lead him away," Theona said. "The man who's looking for you. You're—" She hesitated, unsure how much the girl knew. "Marcus," Sienna said flatly. "My grandfather, though I've never met him. Mom said he's dangerous. She said if anything happened to her, I should wait here. She said someone would come. I didn't know. It would be you. I didn't know I had another grandmother." Theona felt that like a punch. 14 years old, and Sienna hadn't known she existed. Another consequence of her choices, another price her family had paid for her need to disappear. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have been there. I should have." But before she could finish, Sienna stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Theona in a fierce hug. The girl was thin and cold, and she trembled slightly, but her grip was strong. "You're here now," Sienna whispered. "That's what matters." When they pulled apart, Sienna reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple bracelet woven from paracord and decorated with small wooden beads. She'd clearly made it herself, the work careful but imperfect in the way of handmade things. "Mom taught me how to make these," Sienna said, slipping it onto Theona's wrist. "She said it's good to have something to do with your hands when you're scared. I made one for her, one for me, and—" she paused, looking down. "I made one for you too, even though I didn't know if I'd ever meet you. Mom always said you were out here somewhere." Theona looked at the bracelet on her wrist, the simple pattern of knots and beads, and felt something crack open in her chest. This girl, her granddaughter, had been making bracelets for a grandmother she'd never met, hoping someday they'd find each other. "Thank you," Theona said, her voice thick. "I'll wear it always." She stopped as she heard something outside. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate, someone climbing toward them. Sienna's eyes went wide with fear. "He's here," she whispered. "He found me." Theona moved quickly, positioning herself between Sienna and the door. She pulled the knife from her belt and held it ready, wishing she'd brought the revolver from her cabin. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. A voice called through the door, familiar even after 30 years. "Theona, I know. You're in there. Send out the girl and we can talk about this like adults." Marcus, her ex-husband, the man she'd spent 3 decades hiding from, the man who'd found them anyway. "You're not taking her anywhere, Marcus," Theona called back. Her voice was steady, despite the fear and anger roiling in her chest. "After all these years," Marcus said, and she could hear the cold amusement in his voice. "You know, I wasn't sure you were still alive. Wasn't even sure you'd come when Kayla sent up her little signals. But here you are. Perfect." "What do you want?" Theona asked. "What I've always wanted. What's mine? The land, the money. Kayla's being difficult about signing the papers, but I figure the kid will be more cooperative, especially if she knows what's good for her mother." Behind Theona, Sienna made a small sound. Theona reached back and squeezed her hand. "Where's Kayla?" Theona demanded. "What did you do to her?" "Nothing yet," Marcus said, "but that depends on what happens next. So here's how this works. You send out the girl, I get my signatures, and everyone walks away. Simple." "No," Theona said. "No?" Marcus laughed. "You really think you get a say in this? You ran away 30 years ago. You abandoned your own daughter. You don't get to play hero now." But beneath the hurt was something harder, something forged by 3 decades of survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. "I'm not the woman you remember," Theona said quietly. "And I'm not letting you hurt anyone else." "Then we have a problem," Marcus said. The door shuddered as he kicked it. The old wood held, but barely. Another kick, and it would give way. Theona looked around frantically. The cabin was maybe 12 feet square, with windows on all 4 sides and 1 door. No other way out except she looked up. The roof had a hatch, used by the lookouts to access the observation platform on top of the cabin. "Sienna," she said quickly, "we're going up. Can you climb?" The girl nodded, already moving. She was young and agile, and she scrambled up the built-in ladder to the hatch, pushed it open, and pulled herself through. The door shuddered again, harder this time. Theona heard wood splinter. She followed Sienna up the ladder, her shoulder screaming in protest, and emerged onto the observation platform just as the door burst open below. The platform was small, maybe 6 feet square, with a railing around the edge. 50 feet below, the forest floor waited. 50 feet up, the cold morning air bit through her clothes. Marcus's head appeared through the hatch. He was older, his hair grey, his face harder, but the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, angry. "Nowhere to run," he said, climbing up onto the platform. He was big, bigger than Theona remembered, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent his life intimidating people smaller than him. As he pulled himself fully onto the platform, Theona saw the hunting knife on his belt, a large fixed blade with his initials carved into the handle. The same knife he'd carried 30 years ago, the one he used to clean game and sharpen in front of her when he wanted to make a point. He drew it now, the blade catching the morning light. Theona positioned herself in front of Sienna again, her own smaller knife still in her hand, but she knew it was no match for his weapon. "Stay back," she said. Marcus smiled. "Or what? You'll cut me? You don't have it in you, Theona. You never did. You run. It's what you do." He was right about one thing. The old Theona had run, had chosen distance over confrontation, isolation over conflict. But that woman was gone. "Maybe," Theona said, "but I'm done running now." Marcus lunged forward, faster than she expected, the knife thrust out toward her. But Theona had spent 30 years moving through the mountains, and her reflexes were still good. She sidestepped, and he stumbled past her, off balance. The hunting knife clattered from his hand as he tried to catch himself, skittering across the platform and falling through a gap in the boards. For a moment, he teetered at the edge of the platform, his arms windmilling. Then Sienna, with a courage that reminded Theona painfully of a younger Kayla, threw her water bottle at him. It hit him in the shoulder, not hard, but enough to shift his balance that last crucial inch. Marcus fell backward off the platform with a yell of surprise and rage. But he didn't fall far. His hand shot out and grabbed the railing, and he hung there, 50 feet above the ground, his legs kicking for purchase. "Help me," he gasped. "Pull me up." Theona stood at the edge, looking down at him. Part of her wanted to turn away, to let him fall. After everything he'd done, all the fear and pain he'd caused, wouldn't it be justice? But she'd become a different person in these mountains. Someone who valued life, even difficult, dangerous life. She knelt and reached down, grabbed his wrist with both hands. Sienna moved to help, and together they pulled him back up onto the platform. Marcus collapsed, breathing hard, his face pale with shock and exertion. "I should have let you fall," Theona said quietly. "But I'm not going to, because unlike you, I don't hurt people just because I can." She looked at Sienna. "Find something to tie his hands. We're taking him down, and then we're going to find your mother." The girl nodded and disappeared back into the cabin, returning with a length of cord from her pack. They bound Marcus's hands securely, and Theona helped him none too gently back down through the hatch and down the stairs. At the bottom of the tower, she pulled out her satellite phone. 3 bars. Good enough. She dialed the emergency number for the Forest Service. "This is Theona Riggs at Riggs Station," she said when someone answered. "I have a situation here. I need law enforcement at the old fire tower. Coordinates." She read them off her GPS. "I have a man in custody who's wanted for stalking and threatening behavior, and I need help finding a missing woman. Her name is Theona Riggs. She's my daughter." It felt strange to say those words out loud after 30 years. "My daughter." The dispatcher confirmed they'd send help, but it would be at least 4 hours, maybe more with the snow conditions. 4 hours. Theona looked at Sienna, who was watching Marcus with wary eyes, and made a decision. "We're not waiting," she said to the girl. "Your mother's out there somewhere. We're going to find her." The burner phone had been hidden beneath Kayla's sleeping bag in the old processing building, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it dry. Theona found it when she went back to Copper Ridge with Sienna, leaving Marcus tied securely to the base of the fire tower with a stern warning that the temperature was dropping, and if he valued his fingers and toes, he'd stay still and wait for the authorities. The phone had 3% battery left, enough for one last look before it died. Theona powered it on and found a text message thread with a contact labeled only S. She opened it, and Sienna leaned in to read over her shoulder. The messages painted a picture of careful planning and growing fear. Kayla had brought Sienna to the mountains 2 weeks ago, setting up supply caches and escape routes, teaching her daughter the basics of wilderness survival. The SOS on the frozen lake had been planned as a way to contact Theona without revealing Sienna's location to Marcus. Kayla had been watching her mother's cabin from a distance, waiting for the right moment. But something had gone wrong. The last messages showed escalating panic. "Kayla, he found the camp. I'm heading to CR. Stay at tower no matter what." Sienna. "Mom, please be careful." Kayla. "Don't worry, baby. I've got this. If I don't come back, go to the mountain woman. She'll help you." Sienna. "The friend again's the friendsing 2%. Mountain woman?" Kayla. "Your grandmother. My mom. She's stronger than anyone I've ever known. Trust her." The messages ended 18 hours ago. Nothing since. Theona photographed the screen before the battery died, then looked at Sienna. The girl's face was tight with worry but composed. 14 years old and already learning to carry fear without letting it crush her. "Your mother calls me the mountain woman," Theona said softly. "She told me stories about you," Sienna said, "when I was little, about how you could survive anywhere, how you knew the wilderness better than anyone. She made you sound like a legend." "I'm not a legend," Theona said. "I'm just someone who ran away and learned how to survive it. That's not the same as being strong." "Mom doesn't think you ran away," Sienna said. "She thinks you saved yourself. She said she wishes she'd been brave enough to do the same thing." The words hit Theona like a physical blow. All these years, she'd carried the guilt of leaving, the certainty that Kayla hated her for it. But maybe it had been more complicated than that. Maybe her daughter had understood more than she'd ever let on. They searched the Copper Ridge camp thoroughly, looking for any clue about where Kayla might have gone. Theona found more markers, another arrow made of stones, pointing northwest. Away from the camp, deeper into the wilderness. She's leading us away from him, Sienna said, drawing him off. Or leading him into a trap, Theona said grimly. She looked at the girl. How much do you know about survival skills? Can you start a fire? Purify water? Mom taught me, Sienna said. I'm not as good as her, but I can do it. Good, because we're going after her, and it might get rough. They moved out, following the trail northwest. The tracks were clearer now, 2 sets, both moving fast through the snow. Kayla's smaller prints, irregular and showing signs of exhaustion or injury, and behind them, those larger boots, relentless and steady. Marcus had been following Kayla, which meant when Theona and Sienna had encountered him at the fire tower, he'd already tracked Kayla this far and then doubled back, perhaps realizing that getting to Sienna was the faster way to force Kayla's hand. But that meant Kayla was still out here somewhere, alone, possibly hurt. They pushed hard through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest and drink water. Theona rationed their food carefully. They had maybe 2 days' worth of supplies between them, less if the weather turned bad again. The trail led them through increasingly difficult terrain, steep slopes, dense forest, areas where rock slides had created treacherous fields of loose stone buried under snow. Theona moved carefully, testing each step, helping Sienna over the worst sections. As the sun began to set, they found something that made Theona's heart clench. Blood in the snow. Not much, just a few drops, but enough to confirm what she'd feared. Kayla was injured. How bad? Sienna asked, her voice shaking. Not terrible, Theona said, studying the pattern. It's not a steady drip, so not an arterial bleed. Could be a cut, a scrape, maybe a sprain that's bleeding where she's dragging the leg. She's still moving, which is good. They followed the blood trail as the light failed, and just before full dark, Theona spotted something that made her stop. A structure ahead, barely visible through the trees. Not a building, but a rock formation, a natural overhang that created a shallow cave. And from inside the cave, the faint orange glow of a fire. Theona held up a hand, signaling Sienna to stay quiet. They approached cautiously, and Theona called softly, Kayla, it's me. It's Mom. I have Sienna with me. We're alone. Marcus is in custody. For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure moved in the cave entrance, silhouetted against the firelight. Mom? The voice was older, rougher, but Theona would have known it anywhere. Her daughter. After 30 years. Her daughter. It's me, Theona said, her throat tight. We've been looking for you. Kayla emerged from the cave, limping heavily on her left leg. Even in the dim light, Theona could see the exhaustion in her face, the bruises, the way she held herself like someone who'd been pushed past their limits and kept going anyway. And then Sienna was running forward, and Kayla was catching her, and they were holding each other and crying, and Theona stood a few feet away, not sure if she had the right to join them. But then Kayla looked up, and their eyes met grey-green to grey-green, and she held out one hand. Mom, she said, please. Theona stepped forward and wrapped her arms around both of them, her daughter and her granddaughter, and felt something inside her that had been frozen for 30 years finally begin to thaw. They stood there in the snow as darkness fell around them. 3 generations of women who'd survived, who'd endured, who'd finally found their way back to each other. And in that moment, all the years, all the silence, all the pain, none of it mattered as much as this. They were together. They were safe. They were family. Inside the cave, Kayla's fire burned steadily, fed by dry wood she'd collected before the storm. The space was small but defensible, the rock walls blocking the wind and reflecting the heat. Theona helped her daughter sit down by the fire while Sienna unpacked their medical supplies. In the firelight, Theona got her first real look at Kayla in 30 years. She was 48 now, her face lined with worry and hardship, but still beautiful in a way that made Theona's heart ache. Her dark hair, so like Theona's own at that age, was pulled back in a practical braid. Her eyes held the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "Let me see the leg," Theona said, falling into the practical rhythms of wilderness medicine. She'd been a certified EMT before moving to the mountains, and she'd kept her skills sharp, treating her own injuries over the years. Kayla pulled up her pant leg to reveal a deep gash on her calf, roughly bandaged with torn fabric. The wound was maybe 4 inches long, not deep enough to require stitches, but deep enough to be serious. It showed signs of infection, red, swollen, weeping, clear fluid. "How did this happen?" Theona asked, cleaning the wound with precious drinking water and antiseptic from her first aid kit. "Fell on some sharp ice running from Marcus," Kayla said through gritted teeth. "That was yesterday morning. I've been trying to stay ahead of him, but it's been slowing me down. He caught up to us at the fire tower," Sienna said quietly. "But Grandma stopped him." Kayla looked at Theona with something like wonder. "You actually called the authorities? Turned him in?" "He's not going to hurt you anymore," Theona said firmly. She applied antibiotic ointment to the wound and wrapped it in clean gauze. "He's not going to hurt any of us. I tried to protect her," Kayla said, her voice breaking. "I tried to keep Sienna safe from him, from all of it. But he found us anyway. He always finds us." "Not anymore," Theona said. "This ends now." She finished bandaging the leg and sat back, studying her daughter. There was so much she wanted to say, so many years to account for, so many apologies and explanations. But words felt inadequate for the size of the gulf between them. Sienna seemed to sense the tension. "I'm going to get more firewood," she said, and slipped out of the cave before either of them could stop her. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, Kayla spoke. "I read your note at Copper Ridge. You said you're sorry." "I am," Theona said, "more than I can ever express. I thought I was protecting you by leaving. I thought distance would keep you safe from Marcus, from the mess I'd made of things. But I see now that I was just protecting myself. I was the one who couldn't handle it anymore." "You were drowning," Kayla said quietly. "I was too young to understand it then, but I get it now. Being with Marcus was like drowning. Every day, a little more of yourself disappeared until you couldn't remember who you were anymore." Theona looked at her daughter in surprise. "You understand that? I lived with him too. Remember? After I left you. I thought I'd show you, thought I'd prove that he wasn't that bad, that you'd just given up too easily." Kayla laughed bitterly. "Lasted 6 months before I understood exactly why you'd run. By then, I was too proud to come back to you, too angry that you'd been right. I should have fought harder to keep you," Theona said. "Should have found a way to make you understand without you having to learn it the hard way." "You were 28 and broken," Kayla said. "You did what you could. And you know what? Those stories I told Sienna about the mountain woman, they weren't made up. I tracked you down about 5 years after I left. Took me months to find you, but I did. Hiked out to that ridge above your cabin and watched you for a day." Theona stared at her. "You were there. Why didn't you?" "Because I saw how you'd healed," Kayla said simply. "Saw how strong you'd become, how comfortable in your own skin. And I realized that some people need solitude to survive. You'd found your place, your peace. I didn't want to disrupt that. Didn't know if you'd want me disrupting it." "I would have," Theona said, her voice thick. "Every day, I would have welcomed you back, you and Sienna, both of you." Kayla wiped at her eyes. "I should have tried, should have knocked on that door instead of just watching from the ridge. But I was scared. Scared you'd turn me away. Scared you'd still be angry. Scared of 1,000 things that probably weren't even real." "Fear makes us do strange things," Theona said. "Makes us run when we should stay. Makes us stay silent when we should speak." "The letters," Kayla said. "Did you read them all?" "Everyone. They were supposed to be like a journal, a way to feel less alone, I guess. Writing to you even though I never planned to send them. But then, when Marcus found us and I knew I had to run again, I thought maybe this time I should try. Maybe this time I should reach out. So I made the S.O.S. on the lake where I knew you'd see it. Left the trail I knew you'd follow. Hoped you'd understand. I did, Theona said. And I came. You came. Kayla repeated, as if the words still surprised her. After 30 years, you came. Of course I did, Theona said. You're my daughter. That never changed, no matter how many years or miles were between us. Sienna returned with an armload of wood, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, some long frozen barrier beginning to crack. They spent the night in the cave, taking turns keeping watch and feeding the fire. Theona used her satellite phone to update the authorities on their location and status. A helicopter would come at first light to evacuate them. Kayla's infected leg needed proper medical attention, and none of them were in shape for the long hike back to civilization. In the quiet hours before dawn, Theona sat with her back against the cave wall, watching Kayla and Sienna sleep. They were curled together, Sienna's head on her mother's shoulder, and the sight of them, her daughter and granddaughter, safe and together, made something in Theona's chest feel both broken and whole at the same time. She'd spent 30 years alone in the mountains, convinced it was what she needed, what she deserved. But looking at them now, she understood that survival wasn't the same as living. She'd survived. But these two, they'd lived, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful difficulty. And now, maybe, there was a chance for something new. Not a return to the past, but a step forward into an unknown future. Together, the helicopter came with the sunrise, its rotors loud in the mountain silence. They loaded Kayla on a stretcher, Sienna holding her hand, and Theona sat beside them as the helicopter lifted off, carrying them out of the wilderness. Below, the mountains spread out in endless white ridges, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. Theona's cabin was down there somewhere, waiting for her return. But for the first time in 30 years, she found herself thinking about something beyond those mountains, beyond that solitary life. She found herself thinking about family and second chances and the long, difficult work of healing. 3 months later, Theona stood on the porch of her cabin, watching the trail that led up from the valley. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and new green growth. Spring was coming to the Bitterroots, the season of renewal and change. She heard them before she saw them, voices and footsteps on the trail. Then they came into view. Kayla, walking with barely a limp now, the infection long since healed, and beside her, Sienna, carrying a backpack almost as big as she was and grinning at something her mother had said. They'd been coming up every few weeks since that night in the cave, staying for a weekend, sometimes a full week, learning the rhythms of the mountain, learning how to be a family again. It wasn't easy. 30 years of silence didn't disappear overnight. There were awkward moments, difficult conversations, old wounds that needed tending. But they were trying. That's what mattered. Marcus was in jail, awaiting trial on multiple charges. The property he'd tried to claim through intimidation had been legally transferred to Kayla, who'd already decided to sell it and use the money to buy a place closer to the mountains, closer to Theona. "Grandma," Sienna called out, waving. "We brought supplies, and Mom finally agreed to let you teach me how to use the bow." Theona smiled and waved back. Grandma. She was still getting used to the title, still learning what it meant to be needed again, to be part of someone's life beyond her own survival. Kayla reached the porch and pulled Theona into a hug. They did that now, hugged without awkwardness or hesitation. Another thing they were learning. "The cabin looks good," Kayla said, studying the new repairs Theona had made. She'd expanded the porch, added a second sleeping loft for when they visited. Small changes, but significant. "Thought it could use some updating," Theona said. "If you two are going to keep visiting, might as well make it comfortable." "We were actually thinking," Kayla said carefully, "maybe we could help you build an addition. A small room, nothing fancy, for when we stay longer. Theona looked at her daughter, saw the hope and uncertainty in her face. "You want to stay longer?" "If you'd have us," Kayla said. "Not all the time. Sienna still needs to go to school, and I've got work in town. But summers, maybe. Weekends, holidays. This place," she gestured at the mountains around them, "it's healing. For both of us. And I think maybe we could use more of that healing." "I'd like that," Theona said quietly. "I'd like that very much." Sienna was already exploring the clearing, checking on the improvements Theona had made. She'd put up a target for archery practice, built a better woodshed, even started a small garden plot that would be ready for planting in a few weeks. "She's a lot like you were," Theona said to Kayla. "Fearless, curious, strong." "She's better than I was," Kayla said. "She's not carrying all the anger I had. I made sure of that." They stood together on the porch, watching Sienna test the distance to the archery target, already planning her first lesson. "I was thinking," Kayla said, "maybe we could take a hike down to that frozen lake, the one where you found the SOS. I've never actually seen it up close." "The ice has melted by now," Theona said. "But we could go. It's beautiful in spring." "I'd like to see where it started," Kayla said. "Where we started finding our way back to each other." So they went, the three of them, hiking down the trail to the lake. Sienna ran ahead, young and energetic, while Theona and Kayla followed at a more measured pace, talking about everything and nothing, filling in the gaps of 30 years. When they reached the lake, it was indeed melted, the water blue and clear, reflecting the sky and the surrounding peaks. The stones of the S.O.S. They were gone, washed away or scattered by the spring thaw. No sign remained of that desperate signal, that call for help that had changed everything. But they didn't need the stones anymore. They had each other. They had time. They had the slow, difficult, beautiful work of becoming a family again. Sienna found a flat stone and skipped it across the water. It bounced 3 times before sinking. "Grandma, can you teach me to skip stones better?" she asked. "I can try." Theona said, finding a good stone and demonstrating the technique. "It's all in the wrist and the angle of release." They spent an hour by the lake, skipping stones and talking and laughing. The sun was warm on their faces. The air smelled of pine and new growth. And for the first time in decades, Theona felt something she'd almost forgotten. She felt complete. As they hiked back to the cabin, Sienna walked between her mother and grandmother, holding both their hands. She was too old for hand-holding, really, but she didn't seem to care, and neither did they. "So what are we making for dinner?" Sienna asked. "Whatever we want," Kayla said. "That's the nice thing about being up here. No schedules, no rules. Just us and the mountain and all the time in the world." "I was thinking fresh trout," Theona said. "There's a stream about a mile from here that should be running full with the snowmelt. Plenty of fish. I can teach you how to catch them, Sienna, if you want." "Yes," the girl said, enthusiastically. "And can we cook them over a campfire, like real mountain people?" "Absolutely," Theona said, smiling. "Like real mountain people." They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Theona stood on the porch one more time, looking out over the mountains she'd called home for 3 decades. They were still beautiful, still harsh and unforgiving, and perfect in their wildness. But they didn't feel lonely anymore, because she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Maybe not ever again, if she was lucky. Inside the cabin, she could hear Kayla and Sienna laughing about something, their voices warm and alive and filling the space with sound. The photographs on the wall were no longer dusty. Sienna had cleaned them last visit, and now they sat beside newer photos. 3 generations of women, standing together, smiling. The newest photograph had pride of place in the center of the wall, taken just last week by a hiker who'd passed by. It showed all three of them standing in front of the cabin, arms around each other, the mountains rising behind them. Theona in her faded flannel and work boots, Kayla with her arm around her mother's shoulders, Sienna grinning between them with that handmade bracelet visible on her wrist. They looked like what they were, a family that had found its way back together after being lost for too long. Kayla had asked for copies, one for her house in town, one for Sienna's room, but the original stayed here, in the cabin, where it belonged. A reminder that some things broken can be mended, some distances can be crossed, some silences can be filled with laughter and love. Theona took one last look at the mountains, then turned and went inside, closing the door gently behind her. The wilderness would still be there tomorrow, waiting, eternal. But tonight, she had family. She had her daughter and her granddaughter. She had, after 30 years of solitude, come home in a way she'd never expected. Some people run to the mountains to escape their past, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, the past comes looking for you, and instead of running away, you find the courage to stay, to face it, to heal it, and in the end, you discover that the thing you thought you'd lost forever was waiting for you all along. Not in the wilderness, but in the simple, complicated, beautiful act of being together, of being family, of being, finally and fully, found. The cabin door closed with a soft click, and the mountains settled into their evening silence. But inside, the fire burned warm and bright, and three voices spoke and laughed and planned for tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days to come. Because that's what family does. They keep going, together. And in the Bitterroot Mountains, where the winter is long and the silence is deep, a mountain woman had finally learned that the greatest strength isn't in surviving alone. It's in learning to let others survive with you.